Imagine the planet is finally thawing out after a long ice age, and then bam, it gets thrown right back into the freezer. Sounds crazy, right? Well, that's exactly what happened about 12,900 years ago, and it totally reshaped our world. Let's get into it.
Okay, so picture this. It's about 14,500 years ago. The last great ice age is finally ending. These huge glaciers that covered everything, they're in full retreat. The planet's warming up. It really felt like the world was on a one-way track to a much warmer, greener future.
But what if all that progress just stopped? What if the warming didn't just slow down, but suddenly, and I mean violently, went into reverse? This isn't some movie plot. This really happened. It was a climatic U-turn that nobody saw coming. So this is what we're going to explore. One of the most dramatic climate crashes in recent history. A sudden reversal so intense that it's nicknamed the Big Freeze.
So just when things were looking up, the warming just hit a wall. For about 1,300 years, the entire northern hemisphere was plunged right back into near-glacial conditions. Think about that. For over 1,000 years, it was Ice Age temperatures all over again.
This crazy period has a name, of course. Scientists call it the Younger Dryas. And it was, well, a brutal interruption. It was like the planet hit the pause button on spring and rewound back to the dead of winter, catching everything and everyone completely off guard.
You might be wondering about that name, Dryas. It actually comes from this tiny little white flower, Dryas octopetala. It's a tough little plant that absolutely loves the cold, Arctic tundra. And when this big freeze hit, its pollen just exploded across Europe. For scientists, finding layers of that pollen was like a giant flashing sign that said, the tundra's back.
Okay, so how on earth do we know any of this with such detail? Well, it's basically a massive scientific detective story. The clues were all there, literally frozen in time, just waiting for us to find them.
Scientists who study past climates, paleoclimatologists, have this incredible toolkit. They drill down into ancient ice sheets and find these tiny trapped air bubbles, literal samples of ancient atmosphere. They look at fossilized pollen to see what plants were growing, and they analyze layers of mud on the ocean floor. Each one is a critical piece of the puzzle.
But the real smoking gun? That came from ice cores drilled deep into the Greenland ice sheet. As scientists analyzed the layers year by year, they saw the temperature steadily rising, and then, boom, a sudden, massive plunge. It was the complete opposite of what should have been happening. Absolutely shocking data.
Right, so this wasn't just some interesting blip on a graph for scientists. This climate crash had real, devastating consequences. For life on Earth, animals, plants, and people, this was an absolute catastrophe.
Get this, we're talking about a temperature drop of up to 15 degrees Celsius in some spots. I mean, to put that into perspective, that's like taking the climate of, say, Miami and dropping it into Anchorage, Alaska. And this happened fast, maybe within just a few decades. And here's the crazy part. Even before the big freeze kicked in, the initial warming had caused massive chaos. All that melting ice sent global sea levels soaring by about 400 feet. We're talking millions of square miles of land just gone, disappeared under the waves.
For the animals, this was a disaster. These wild climate swings were just too much, too fast. In North America alone, something like 75% of the big mammals, the megafauna, got wiped out. Woolly mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, those giant ground sloths, gone forever. They just couldn't adapt.
And it wasn't just the animals, you know? There was an entire human culture, the Clovis people, who are thriving all across North America. And then, right when the Younger Dryas starts, they just vanish from the archaeological record. Poof! It's like their entire world, everything they relied on to survive, just collapsed from under them.
So, the big question is, what could possibly cause something like this? What's the culprit behind the big freeze? Well, the investigation turned to a prime suspect, something massive happening in the North Atlantic Ocean.
Okay, so the leading theory is basically a massive plumbing disaster for the planet. Here's how it likely went down. As the huge North American ice sheet was melting, it formed an absolutely enormous lake of meltwater called Glacial Lake Agassiz. At some point, the ice dam holding all that water back just broke, and a gigantic flood of fresh cold water poured into the North Atlantic. This fresh water is less dense, so it just sat on top like a lid, and it shut down the ocean's giant conveyor belt that brings warm water north.
It's like someone just flipped the off switch on the Northern Hemisphere's heating system.
And here is the killer piece of evidence. This is what really seals the deal for most scientists. While the North, Greenland, was freezing solid, ice cores from Antarctica show that the South actually warmed up. It's called the bipolar seesaw, and it makes perfect sense, right? If you shut off the system that pumps heat to the North, that heat has to go somewhere. It gets backed up, trapped in the Southern Hemisphere, warming it up. It's the perfect fingerprint for an ocean circulation shutdown.
Now, to be fair, there are other, more explosive theories out there. Some scientists think it had to be something even bigger, like a comet hitting the Earth and throwing up a ton of dust, or a giant solar flare messing with the climate. These are definitely intriguing ideas, but for now, the strongest evidence really does seem to point back to that colossal flood of meltwater. But here's the thing. The story doesn't end with a frozen planet. Just as suddenly as this big freeze began, it ended. And what came next? Well, it literally set the stage for the modern world. For us.
And when I say suddenly, I mean it. The warming at the end was shockingly fast. In Greenland, temperature shot up 10 degrees Celsius. That's 18 degrees Fahrenheit in maybe a single decade. A decade! It's like the planet's climate didn't just wake up, it jumped out a bit.
So let's put it all together. The Younger Dryas chaos finally ends about 11,600 years ago. The planet enters our current geological epoch, the Holocene. And the key thing about the Holocene, it wasn't just warm, it was stable. The crazy climate swings were over. And what do you know? Just a little while later, humans invent farming. That is absolutely not a coincidence.
Think about it. You just can't build a farm if you don't know whether next year it will bring a flood, a drought, or an ice age. It was this newfound stability, this predictable rhythm of the seasons, that allowed agriculture to even be possible. That allowed for villages, then cities. Basically, our entire civilization is built on the calm weather that came after this chaotic deep freeze.
So that leaves us with a pretty big thought to chew on, doesn't it? Everything we've built as a species grew out of this amazing gift of 11,000 years of stable climate. The story of the Younger Dryas is this incredible, stark reminder from our own planet's history of just how fast that stability can vanish. And as our climate becomes unstable again, it really makes you wonder, how are we going to fare?